Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod here to talk about MSU's upcoming game against the Rutgers Scarlet Knights at Madison Square Gardens on Saturday. Please take a moment right now, pause the show, go and leave a five-star written review, please, on your podcast player. It just takes a second. And if you're watching YouTube, make sure you hit the subscribe button and smash the like button. We really appreciate that too. All right, Rod, Michigan State is running an 11-game winning streak into Madison Square Gardens and sits alone atop the Big Ten at 7-0. Before the Illinois game, I think it was reasonable for people to pause and have some doubts as to whether this team could deliver the goods against the best teams. Now, however, I think they've been shown that they belong in the top and have still have to continue to win games against teams they should beat. And Rutgers is one of those teams. Rutgers just came off an 8-point loss against Penn State on Monday night and snapping with the 2-game win streak that they had. They're ranked 82nd on KenPom, 85th in the net. And so they have slim to no tournament chances outside of really heating up at the end of the Big Ten season here after absence for their team from the tournament before. So as far as the team profile, when it comes to offense defense, they're 63rd on offense, which is not great, but they're a little better. They don't turn the ball over very much, which is nice at 39th, but they don't shoot the ball very well. They're 200th in threes, and they're 146 in twos. And they're not a very good offensive rebounding team, which is unusual for Pikiell. He's traditionally had very good rebounding teams. They sit 162nd in offensive rebounding, and they don't get to the free throw line very often. They're 111th. And on defense, where Rutgers has always been very strong, they are not good. They're 108th. It's not as bad as Fran and the boys down in Iowa City, but it's pretty poor. And they're new players. They don't have many carryovers, as we talked about in a pregame this summer, if you happen to listen. And the problem is they just can't guard against the threes. They're 226. Against the twos, they're 186th. Rebounding has been really bad. And again, this is really unusual. So this is going to be a team, if you have not watched Rutgers, this is not going to be your typical Rutgers team, most likely. I always say that with the rebounding, but they're 202nd in defensive rebounding, which is, I don't know what their worst was before that, but it had to have been upper hundreds, I would think, like before, less than 100. That's what I meant. They don't also cause many turnovers, 227th. So there's not much they do really. And I think it's sort of like Iowa. They're not very foul prone at 80th, but that's probably in part because they're not close enough to you to defend to get any fouls.
Yeah, I've tried to think about the best way to characterize Rutgers this year, and I think you can frame it as deal with the devil, poison chalice, those kinds of terms, because if you can imagine Steve Pikiell being told, you're not going to get one lottery pick freshman, top 5 national recruit. You're going to get 2, because that's what he's got. And that's territory that, if you're not Kentucky or Duke, over the last 15 years, you don't have that. There's nobody in the Big Ten that's done that. I mean, the last time Michigan State did that, I think, was the 2000-2001 season with Marcus Taylor and Zach Randolph. I think is the only time Tom Izzo's ever had 2 top 5 guys. That's what Steve Pikiell's got in Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper. But here comes the poison devil part of the equation. You're going to lose almost everybody that you might have thought you'd have coming back. And you're going to end up replacing them with portal guys, other freshmen, and it's going to turn out that and here's the thing, Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper pretty much have met any reasonable expectation you could have had. They're both scoring in excess of 19 points a game. They both rebounded well. They've passed well. They've been every bit the players they were supposed to be. And yet Rutgers' record is what it is.
Yeah.
That's because there's just really no support for it. Now, for those 2 guys, offensively, they're actually better than most of Pike's teams have been in terms of where they sit in KenPom ratings. and that's large. I don't think that's because they're running better stuff. I think it's largely because they have two NBA talents that can make that offense look a little better just by virtue of their ability, their shot making ability. Defensively and on the boards at both ends, however, which anyone who's paid attention the last 6-7 years knows, those are the foundation elements of Steve Pikiell's program.
Yeah.
They've often struggled offensively, but you knew they were going to rebound and they were going to defend. Well, those things are off the table, and I think it's easy to kind of easy to understand why. You know, there by my count, there are only 3 guys back from last year's team, and only 2 of those guys played much a year ago. So it really was, and none of them are starters at the moment. So it really was kind of starting over. And defense tends to be something, in my view, my experience watching it, outside of a very few guys. John Calipari used to be one who could somehow reinvent his roster every year and yet still always get those teams to defend.
Mhm.
That's a hard trick to turn.
Yeah.
And Steve Pikiell has not turned it with this group. And I think it's largely down to just not having familiarity, not having leaders, not having carryover from previous seasons on the roster. And it's been tough. It's been a struggle. The rebounding thing is really hard for me to understand. It goes to show you that if it was as simple as just having some size and some length, you know, anybody could recruit to that, because
Right.
Rutgers has plenty of size. They're a big team, but they're a terrible, terrible rebounding team. And so that speaks to, I think, an undisciplined element about this team. And that's easier to understand when you think about it in those terms as to how they might be struggling on the boards. You know, we talked
Yeah.
in our Illinois post game, and Tom Izzo went at it in his post game about how, you know, he's not a believer in the traditional boxing out. He doesn't think that works at this level. That he talks about cutouts, which is basically seek a body, make contact with a body, go get the ball. And you saw it in that Illinois game, right? Michigan State, I don't think, was tremendously disciplined in how they, in the first half especially, in how they approach that element of the game. And Illinois made them pay for it. Well, some similar things could be going on with Rutgers and this
Yeah.
group just because of a lack of experience, both period in college basketball or within the Rutgers program. And that they're just not, they're not making contact going to get the ball.
Yeah. Right.
So it's been tough. I mean, I think, and I'll admit to it, I figured that those 2 freshmen were good enough, and there was at least a reason to think that the portal guys, you know, this goes to show you the crapshoot nature of the portal. You can look at what guys have done and say, well, okay, we're trying to project how they're going to fit into a new structure. I thought they'd have enough to, I forget where exactly I picked them, but I didn't pick them near the bottom. And in fairness, they have won 3 games, so they're not at the bottom right now. But
right, 3 and 5, they're in the middle-ish. Yeah.
But I'll be honest. I mean, despite that record, I thought they would be in, at least in the bubble conversation.
Yeah.
That's sort of what I expected. And that's barring a miracle run here at the end of the season. That's not going to happen. So it's like I say, the poison chalice. Here you go. The best recruiting class in Rutgers history, like far and away.
Yeah.
And yet nowhere near the kind of achievement that Pikiell's teams have had, not so much last year when they struggled, but say the 4 years before that, where they were, you know, in the NCAA tournament annually and were a really, really difficult team to play against. I mean, people listening to this know Michigan State has not had an easy run against Rutgers. They did last year, but the several years before that, those were like getting your teeth pulled. playing that team. And that has just not, I don't know how many listening to this watched. I watched most of their game against Penn State last night, which you mentioned they lost in Happy Valley. This is not a tough team to play against. That doesn't mean they're not capable of playing well at times, doing certain things well, but they're not hard to play against in the way that we think about with Rutgers basketball. It's like just a complete departure from what Steve Pikiell's program has been about. And it makes me wonder, prospectively, how he's going to deal with things. Those two guys are going to be gone,
Right.
probably within hours of the declaration
Minutes
point for the
right.
draft. Yeah. And so then it becomes, okay, you got to reinvent this thing again. Which way do you go? And, in some ways, it's a lot harder for him now than it was when he took the job, because when he took the job, we were in a pre-portal era, and he clearly recruited to what he wanted his program to be. So, and I say this having been very impressed generally with the job Steve Pikiell's done. I think he's a good coach. I think the Rutgers job was right near the bottom of high major jobs nationally, and he made it work. And he made it work by emphasizing the things we talked about, right? But he also did it by building his program over time. You think about some of the guys he had there for years, the big kids. He had Miles Johnson, then he had Cliff Omarui, who's at Alabama now.
Right.
You had Paul Mulcahy. He had what was the kid's name? Gio. I'm drawing a blank on his last name. But he had all these guys that were there for 4-year runs, and it worked. Now with the portal, he's in a situation, as he discovered last year. If he had brought back all the guys that could have come back to Rutgers to play with these two freshmen, we'd be having a very different conversation about this team. But his roster just got cleared out by guys leaving. And so now he's in this situation where he's going to have to reinvent it again next year. And is he going to be able to get the kind of roster that can play the way that traditionally he wants to play? Because I can't imagine he's happy with this. I've got to believe, and they're playing fast. His teams have never played fast. They don't guard anybody. They don't rebound. It's got to be killing him. I had always wondered, and my thought, I think I'd said it on this podcast years ago, that you could see Pikiell building and saying, okay, he's starting by establishing the way he wants his teams to play. Like you could do that fairly easily. And then you get the talent a little better from there. Maybe you can actually start winning. And he did that. And then I thought the last step was going to be, what happens when he's got his program in place? They've got their pattern of play, their style of play established, but he can upgrade the talent. Maybe start getting some of these highly ranked kids that seem to come out of New Jersey every year, right?
Yeah.
And he started to do that, and it was fine. It was still okay, but then he went nuclear with these two guys. But the whole rest of the thing is just, like I say, they're unrecognizable in terms of their play style. And so I'm going to be very curious to see, since we kind of know what they are this year, that's been more or less decided. I'm curious to see what he does this coming spring. It's got to be very frustrating.
Well, they were 10-9 overall, 3-5 in the Big Ten. So they managed to win that game against UCLA. Which at home, but again, UCLA was in that big, huge slide. They won lost 4 in a row,
and they've been
not taking away. They beat UCLA, so
they were in the midst of that travel nightmare too. They were in the midst of that. Play at Nebraska, come home to play Michigan in LA 3 days later. Then 3 days after that, they're in Maryland, and then after that, they went to Rutgers. So, you'd like to think UCLA is still good enough to pull that off, but I still kind of not taking anything away from Rutgers, but
it's understandable that it happened. It's not they still had to beat them, and they had to be good enough to beat them, obviously. And I totally agree with Pikiell. He's in a funny situation because he'll never have this. I mean, I cannot imagine another scenario where he gets two top five,
No,
recruits again. I mean, this is like a once in a
no, it
lifetime
doesn't
thing.
happen. Like I said,
No,
Tom Izzo's done it once, and
yeah,
Tom Izzo's been the recruiting gold standard in this league for nearly 30 years,
sure.
and he's done it once.
And as you mentioned, the problem with this is that in basketball, especially, you have just that 1 year window with these players. And so what can you get out of
Yeah.
them? And can you have a team around them? And the fact that he lost his entire team or the majority of his team, tough with that transfer portal. And he's lost, and with this whole situation, and I don't know if the reason that everyone left is because these guys are coming. I don't know if that had something to do with it.
Well,
It didn't seem like it initially when we were looking at the departures, but
I'm
uh,
going to give it. I'm going to throw two possibilities out there in
okay.
response to that. One is that there might have been some guys said, "Hey, I know these guys are going to get all the shots. I can see which way the wind's blowing. I don't
Yeah.
want to be around for that." The second one, though, and probably the more salient point, is why the portal bit Rutgers the year prior as well.
Yeah.
It's NIL.
Sure. Yeah. The
If you
financial
remember,
support's not there. Yeah.
they lost 2 years
Mulcahy.
ago. They lost Mulcahy and they lost Cam Spencer to UConn,
Yeah.
which
Right.
was a huge loss. And so that was, you thought you had 2/3 of a very good backcourt coming back, and
Right.
instead you had none. That was a big deal. And so after that happened, it shouldn't have been too shocking to see it happen again. Now you could say, well, then how the hell did they get Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper? It's a good question. And I got to believe those guys are getting paid, market rate. But as we know, freshmen don't, the real big money, when you hear guys talk about like at
Yeah.
seven figures, you don't hear about that with regard to freshmen. You hear
Right.
about that for returning guys who had a market to go to. It doesn't seem to have, and I don't mean those guys are getting nothing or they're getting like 50 grand. They're being paid well, but I would be kind of surprised to hear that either of them is getting seven figures. So I think the problem for Pikiell now is going to continue to be retention.
Yeah.
Unless he can get NIL straightened out. And you know what? And I haven't heard any rumors or talk about this, but Steve Pikiell's not a super young guy. I think he's in his 60s now, early
Hmm.
60s.
Yeah.
How much longer does he want to bang his head against a wall?
Well, I mean, look at the program because we talked about before, and as you mentioned just a little bit ago, he built a culture of rebounding defense,
Yeah.
hard nosed play. It's gone. Like it's totally gone. There's nobody left really for the most part who retains that. So you have to rebuild that. I mean, you can be that coach, but you got to kind of do it again. And
And
that's the danger of the transfer portal. And it's not his fault that it happened. It's just he just kind of happened to
and
be around when that happened. It occurred.
and I would say a hard thing to do when you're dealing with 1 year guys and this transactional sort of thing. Hard to do. When you look at the success that he had in building that thing, it was just prior to the portal era and the NIL era coming into being. So he had guys who he worked with for multiple years at a time.
Yes.
And you have the ability then to get your program the way you want it, get the standards set and impose that, and also develop guys. His guys got better year to year typically.
Yeah.
That's all out the window. And I just think, man, it's for all the bitching and moaning the last few years from Michigan State fans, it's like just look at it now.
Yeah.
And you think about what they've been leaning into, this particularly this be different thing that Tom Izzo talks about. And Michigan State is vastly different than the rest of college basketball right now.
Yeah.
Doesn't guarantee that they're going to ultimately end up putting any banners up at Breslin. We hope so, and they've got a shot to do it, I think, but no guarantees that happens. So then you can debate whether it was all worth it. But in my mind, it is, because once again, we have a team that is in the mix and competing and able to compete for these things. And you look around college basketball, Not many other examples. Purdue is the other one in the Big Ten that largely has gone at it this way. You can't ding their accomplishments. I think
Right.
Shaka Smart at Marquette, who I might not have at the outset of this stuff, I might not have, he wouldn't have come to mind early for me as a guy who would embrace development and retention, but he has.
Yeah.
And it sure seems to be working there for that program. So I think it's a very, very difficult thing, but be thankful that the program you support has been able to turn that trick to keep guys here that they wanted and to continue to help them get better year on year and keep the standards. Or in Michigan State's case, we can even see that even without the transactional stuff, they still had some slippage, which we talk about a lot, right? The
Yeah.
return to running, the return to being an elite rebounding team.
Right.
These are things that have been program standards for a long time that maybe it slipped a bit. It did slip a bit the last few years. But now it seems like it's back, and I suspect that it's going to remain back for a while. I don't think we'll see another slip in that way anytime soon.
Yeah. No, I
But
agree.
I feel for Pikiell because it's a different landscape than the one he took this job in, and to get it back the way he had it, if he can pull that off, and if a year from now we're saying, "Wow, they are super tough to play against again," hats off to him because
Yeah.
that will have
That
been a hell of a trick.
that'll be impressive if he manages that because how many recruits have we talked to where the number one reason why do you want to go to Michigan State feels like a family, right? You cannot have a family feel
Right?
if people are gone all the time. I
Yeah.
could say in medicine, whereas we train new residents to, whatever the specialty is, if you had all first year residents all the time, it'd be really tough because you're teaching basics. And to your point about Pikiell, you can't develop players when you're trying to, teach them the basics of, running the offense or running the defense. It's the second, third year guys who know the nuances. They know, when to switch, when to rotate, or call things out. If you don't have any of those people around, it's really hard to operate efficiently, and that's what you're seeing from Rutgers for the numbers.
Yeah, and look, there are guys. You look at somebody like Brad Underwood, who has so far at least navigated this portal era reasonably well. I would argue that a couple years back they were off. They didn't get it right. But last year, and it appears this year, they've gotten it right, and he's been able to do it in a way where he's altered the way that they play to fit his roster. Since he's
Yeah,
been the coach there, they've played offensively and defensively about 4 or 5 different ways. Credit to him for being able to do that. Not many guys can do that over the long run, and I would question whether he's going to be able to consistently hit that note year in, year out, going at it that way. I think that's really hard to do. You can go back 2 years ago, and we've talked about this before. Everybody raving about the job Jerome Tang did. He had an
right.
entirely new roster, and they're in the Elite Eight. Where'd they
Yeah.
go last year? Where are they this year? It's hard to live that way, as you say, when you're constantly churning through people. There's no continuity, and there's no what I would call institutional learning. There's no memory on the roster of, well, this is how we do things here, because
Yeah.
everybody's new. So it's a hard world to live in. There's no doubt about that. And I know a lot of MSU fans turned negative on Pikiell 2 years ago with that scheduling brouhaha around
The
MSU's, the
shooting. Yeah.
shooting at MSU and all
Yeah.
that. But I still, for the most part, I still have a lot of respect for him because I think he did a very, very good job at a very tough place to do it well. But yes, you have to start wondering, watching what's gone on this year, following last year where I thought they underachieved. Is the steam kind of running out of that thing? Because he
Well,
does not look to me like a guy who is likely to be successful just totally reinventing how he plays year after year. I just don't see that.
if you're someone who wants to try and succeed where it looks like it's hard to succeed, call the people who can do that for you. And when it comes to your gutter work, the brother suggests you gutters. Whether it's you have leaky gutters, maybe they're run down, maybe they're just falling down, maybe a bad downspouts or they're missing, or your water's pooling by your house. The Brothers Just Gutters can take care of that. They can also take care of it so you don't have to get up on your ladder anymore to clean up leaves or have to buy some remote controlled gutter cleaner robot like I did, which still has a problem that you have to get on the ladder in order to put it in the gutter and then take it out of the gutter and cause a tremendous mess. So contact the Brothers Just Gutters. They got you covered whether you're on the east side or the west side of the state. They have super friendly people. They can come out even this time of weather. They can get in as long as your gutters are open. They can take care of them right now. Although I don't know, I wouldn't want that working up a ladder when it's what 4 degrees, -4. I don't know what it is right now. It's
yeah, you're in the ballpark.
we've even had probably more snow than you have on your side of the state. But either way, it's still they're out there doing the job, the Lord's work, right? 10% off. You mentioned Final Four when you get your estimate. You can find out ways of doing that at our support page at tffinots.com/support. There you can get a hold of Greg or Kurt. And they support the player that Michigan State has to keep in the gutter. And this will be interesting to see what you decide. And we're going to go through the lineup here for Rutgers. I'll begin with Tyson Acuff. His name that might be familiar to Michigan State because I know he was on the radar as far as a transfer or maybe recruiting initially.
Not really. Not really.
I feel like we
you're
mentioned him
thinking of
once or
it-
twice.
You're thinking
maybe.
of his younger brother, Darius, who
Oh, that's it. That's what it
is
is.
a big-time recruit who will be at Arkansas next year.
That's what I was thinking then.
Yeah.
So Tyson, 6'4", senior transfer from Eastern Michigan, came up from Cass Tech, Detroit. He's now a starter. He's averaging 4 points a game on 33, 36, and 79 shooting. But he only plays 14 minutes despite starting.
Yeah, he got hurt. He had a foot injury in the off season, and so
was he at Michigan State?
Right, exactly. He's played in every game, I think, but I think it's only recently that they felt like he was getting near 100%, and so that should be taken into account. We're looking at his numbers. He was one of the leading scorers in the country last year at Eastern. He was, I forget what exactly he ended up at, but plus 20 points a game. And so they thought, well, he's a guy who could add some scoring punch.
Yeah.
And, it's worth mentioning, Rutgers has had a little bit of a Michigan flavor to their roster. They got a couple guys this year, and it's because a few years ago they added a guy named Smoke Williamson as an assistant coach. He had previously been at Pitt, and before that he was a significant figure in the family, the Michigan Nike EYBL program, AAU program. So that explains why Rutgers has shown up in some of these recruitments, and I think why they were able to get Acuff in the portal. He just had, obviously, his 2-point shooting, he's really struggled. But I saw Tyson Acuff play at Cass Tech. It seems like a decade ago. Probably not quite that long, but probably
7-8 years. Yeah, right.
7-8 years. It was probably, I think it was early in his career at Cass Tech. He was a good player there, but he wasn't a Big Ten level recruit at that time. So he was one of these guys that worked at the mid-major level for a while, put up some big numbers, and then got his shot this year at Rutgers. But he's began starting recently, and we'll see how it goes. But definitely healthier now than he was early in the season.
Then we have one of the five stars, top 5 guys, Dylan Harper. People might have remembered his his dad, Ron Harper, and then Ron Harper Jr., who played at Rutgers as well. 6'6", 215-pound freshman. He's averaging 19.3 points a game, 5.1 rebounds a game. Leads the team in assists with a little over 4 a game with a just almost 2-to-1 assist to turnover ratio. And he's shooting 49, 34, and 72.
Yeah. His game is a lot like his older brothers, except it's a little better because he's a little more athletic. If you remember, Ron Harper Jr. was like the definition of a power wing.
Yeah, he was built like a tank.
He was big. Dylan is more athletic, not quite the athlete his dad was, who was pre-knee injury, was an incredible athlete. His dad, Ron Harper Sr., was one of the first guys that was caught with the dreaded Next Jordan label. And didn't quite get to that point, but he became a very good NBA player, as I'm sure some of our listeners remember. but he was an exceptional athlete. I would say Dylan is better than his brother was, not quite as good an athlete as his dad was, but he's got his brother's skill set where he can do some of everything. He's just in much better shape than Ron Jr. was at any point. They look very similar, but as I say, he's just in better condition. The problem for Dylan is he's been battling some nagging injuries the last few weeks. And last night against Penn State, he twisted his ankle in the first half, and he'd just come back from an injury problem.
Hmm.
And it was bad enough that Pikiell wasn't immediately sure what his status will be. Now, I would still expect him to play. He's got several days until we're recording this on Tuesday. He's got till Saturday. But it kind of depends. And even if he plays, is it going to limit his effectiveness? That goes without saying, a tremendously important guy for Rutgers. I think the one maybe little bit of a surprise is I think they expected him to shoot the deep ball a little better. I think they thought he'd be like a high 30s guy, and he's been like a low 30s guy. But other than that, not much to complain about. He's been really good.
Yeah. So next is another one of those top picks, Ace Bailey, 6'10", 210 pounds, freshman. He is averaging 19.9 points a game, a little under 8 rebounds a game, shooting 48, 39, and 61. He's the other ace, I guess, in the league, right? Ace Baldwin for Penn State and Ace Bailey. He's a good little ahead of him in alphabetical order, I suppose, right?
Yeah. He's also averaging over a block a game too.
Yeah.
You need to watch him for maybe 10 seconds. And then you see why he's ranked where he was, why he's considered to be a lock as a top 5 pick in the draft next year. He's got NBA written all over him. To be his size at 6'10" and have the athletic ability and the skill set that he's got. I mean, I don't want to put, next Kevin Durant on anybody because that's unfair. But Ace Bailey has at least stylistic and physical elements that remind you of someone like Durant, including an ability to hit really tough shots. Now, my criticism of him is I think he settles for tough shots too often. But then you look at the numbers. He was on a heater last night. I think he was 10 for 13 from the floor against Penn State. So he did him with some of those being threes. His numbers got bumped up a bit after last night. But I think he hurts himself, and I think he hurts his team at times with his shot selection. But at the same time, when you watch him, you see he's probably the national leader in yes shots. Meaning he takes a shot that you're screaming, no, and then it falls.
Yeah, that was like my wife last night with Kate Jackson, where he pulled up for like a 12 for. She said, no. Oh, and he hit it. Yes. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. But he'll miss some too.
Sure.
And so if you're Michigan State, you're okay with his shot selection, I think. You just got to hope he's not really pulling rabbits out of hats. But again, just like Harper, tremendous talent. You're probably not realistically going to stop him.
Yeah.
You've just got to hope to make it an efficient night. That's probably the best you can do.
Well, we had a first player there, 4 points a game. Harper almost a little over 19 points a game. Bailey almost 20 points a game. And now we're moving to Dylan Grant, 6'7", 200-pound freshman from Ontario. Played high school in Michigan. But he's starting and he's averaging only 5 points a game. So you started to see the huge drop off outside of those two players.
You are, but he's a guy over his last 2 games, both of which have been starts. He's 10 for 13 from the floor. He wasn't playing early on, and I'm not sure why, but he is now, and he's been pretty effective. I'm not surprised. I saw Dylan Grant play over the last couple of years for the family, and I did think he was a guy that it wouldn't have surprised me. I remember thinking at the time that he would be end up a high major guy, and that he's having some success at Rutgers. I think he's got the game to be a very good player. But you're right, his seasonal numbers are somewhat limited, but it's just worth noting he's been playing better of late.
Yeah, for the season, he is shooting as 47, 33, and 25.
Yeah.
But as you mentioned, he's done well last recently. And then the last starter would be Lathan Somerville, 6'10", 270-pound freshman, averaging 7.2 points a game, 4.2 rebounds a game, plays about half a game at 20 minutes, shooting 52 and 25, but he's only taken 4 3-pointers, and 83 at the line.
Yeah, he's another for a freshman, and he was kind of a borderline top 100 guy, but not shocking that he's been decently productive. You look at him, you look at his physical profile, and you just think, well, low post bruiser, but that free throw percentage tells you, and if you watch him play, you'll see it reflected on the floor at times. He's
Mm-hmm.
actually he's got some range. He's got an ability to shoot from range. Not quite dialed into 3-point range yet, but he can be a threat in the mid range. He's a good free throw shooter, and as a big body, that's a nice thing to have because you figure he's going to draw fouls. Nice player, not the problem Rutgers has. If you look at the starting lineup, you see potential. I mean,
Yeah.
2 superstar freshmen, and then the other 2 guys are guys that are playing decently right now, and you can see a lot of ceiling for them to get better. And then, Acuff is a portal guy who, maybe just now is starting to round into 100% physical shape, and so he might
Mm-hmm.
get better from here. You can see some pieces, but it's mostly offensive.
Yeah.
This is just not a coherent team defensively. That's where they're getting hurt. So I like Somerville's potential a great deal, but the total package is not there yet.
All right. So who would you have as the player Michigan State needs to keep in the gutter for this game? Would it be, I mean, it's obviously down to Harper and Bailey.
Yeah, I'm gonna go. I think Bailey's a safe pick because
Yeah,
Harper might be a little less than 100%,
sure.
and Bailey's been playing. Earlier this season, I think Harper was maybe playing a little better. It seems to have turned lately. Some of that being health related, I think, to be honest. But I'm going to go with Bailey. I think he's a little more impactful. He's a better rebounder. He gives them really the only kind of rim protection element they have is what he's providing in addition to the scoring. So I'm going to go with Ace Bailey.
Okay. All right, then let's go through the reserves. We'll start with Zach Martini, 6'8", 250-pound grad transfer from Princeton. I suppose he's not quite the player that to stir the drink that they'd hope for at Rutgers. He's averaging 4.1 points a game, 1.9 rebounds a game in about 17 minutes, shooting 45, 38, and 62.
Yeah, a big body at 6'8", 250, but when you watch him play, he's really in there to do one thing, and that's shoot threes.
Yeah. And then Emmanuel Ugbole, 6'10", 270-pound junior. He is a holdover from Rutgers team last year. He's averaging 3.5 points a game, 4.4 rebounds a game in about 15 minutes, shooting 61% from the floor and 57% from the line.
He's also started to play a little more lately. And, he's one of the few guys that you could say, okay, this is more of the standard issue Pikiell developmental routine where he's showing enough now. I mean, he's a big kid.
Yeah.
And he's showing enough now that you don't have to squint too hard to say, well, that's a guy I could imagine, you know, being a 10-6 guy next year if
Mm-hmm.
everything were to pan out. I don't know if he's going to be able to play that big a role because Somerville, if he sticks around, will presumably play a lot as well. And I don't think those guys will ever play together. But it's nice to have this kid as a backup for sure. That's the thing. You look at it physically and you think, well, both those guys are big. That's the Rutgers
Mm-hmm.
profile
Yep.
at the 5. But it's not working defensively or on the boards.
Yeah. Well, then you have Jeremiah Williams, 6'4" senior. He transferred in from Temple. He's also played at Iowa State, although I guess he didn't last
He
season.
was
Didn't
at
play.
Iowa
Yeah,
State.
he's
He
at
didn't
Iowa State, but
play.
didn't play because he was injured. Yeah.
It's worth also mentioning that he tried to transfer to Illinois last year and it didn't work. So he ended up at Rutgers.
Seems like Illinois will take anybody who transfers. So it's kind of surprising they didn't get
Well,
Illinois.
there was trouble with this one.
Troy.
There were rumors. I will just tell you there were rumors of involvement in some gambling stuff that I believe didn't end up coming to pass. Like he wasn't charged
Oh,
or
okay.
anything. But that I seem to remember that was the story. Don't quote me on that 100%, but I think that was the story.
In which case, he should have ended up in Nebraska since they have Aaron
Right.
Eulis, right?
Right.
Yeah. He averages 7.2 points a game, 3.2 rebounds a game, shoots 46, 23, and 70. So you can see why he's not playing a ton, shooting 23%.
Well, he's still playing a lot. He was a starter for most of the year, and he was actually pretty good once he started playing last season. But I think the deep shooting has been the big disappointment, and again, this is a team that, such as it is, they're kind of banking on offense to get it done since they're not guarding anybody. So if you're only shooting 20-some% from three and you're a guard, you can understand why they're shifting the roles around a little bit, but he's still an important guy for them, no question.
Jordan Jurkak is 6'6", 220-pound junior transfer from Merrimack, averaging 6.7 points a game, 3.7 rebounds in about 22 minutes, shooting 37, 21, and 73, and a little over 2 assists a game.
That's a big disappointment in terms of that 3-point number, because that's what he was brought in to do, was to give them a wing with some size, but also a guy who could provide some perimeter offensive punch, and it has not happened. So again, it's, spin the portal wheel and see what you get, and it hasn't quite worked out thus far.
Right. I mean, how many times we talk about those players who they're, you never know if that 38, 39% they're bringing from the low major,
it's going to hold up.
Right. Is going to hold up when you get to the mid-major high.
Well,
right? So.
I mean, look, now Michigan State, the equation started to change, but at the start of the year, Frankie Fiddler was a 20-point-a-night guy at Omaha, and at a pretty similar level, Zapala, his minutes were limited, but he was about 9-point-a-night guy, and not a huge rebounder. Mm-hmm. Everybody, I don't think you would have found a single person who in July or even October wouldn't have said Frankie Fiddler will make a much bigger impact. Now, again, it's starting to balance lately, which is great. And it's not because Zapala is declining. It's because Frankie is rising in his impact. But right now, on balance for the course of the season, I think I would lean towards Zapala having had a better year.
Yeah, sure.
And it just goes to show you can't know until you see it.
Yeah, absolutely. There's, as you've mentioned many times, these are not video game players, right? These are not just stats you can put in there. And so some players fit in and they're like comfortable in the new system, and others maybe not so much, and maybe they can't compete at that level. You just never know.
I'll give you another one. When Michigan brought their portal class in, and they were high, obviously, on a guy like Golden. They were high also on Wolf. So it's not a shock that those guys have been good, but they were really high on a guard they brought in from North Texas, Reuben Jones. There was all this talk about, he's a Swiss Army knife. He can play on the ball, he can play off the ball, he can guard anybody. He played in the same conference as Dusty May coached in, and so they knew him extremely well. He's been a bust. I mean, he hasn't played well. He hasn't contributed much. And their guard play has been an issue. They need somebody to step up, and he hasn't done the job. So, short of bringing your own guy in, that was about as close a look as you could have had as a coach at a guy to bring in from the portal. And he was extremely productive at North Texas. Really good.
Yeah.
Hasn't panned out. You just don't know.
It's just like you watch those highlight videos for recruits. They never miss a shot. You watch them, they hit everything, right? And then they come to the gym. Hey, they don't shoot 100%. Finally, it's Jamichael Davis, 6'2", sophomore. Played a lot as a freshman. He's averaging 3.6 points a game. He's had 31 assists on to 11 turnovers, and shooting 32, 21, and 63.
Yeah, he's really. I mean, Tyson Acuff can handle the ball, but I don't know that I believe that he's a great point guard instinctually. Davis is the one guy on this team that actually is by nature a point guard. And he was also good enough as a freshman defensively that Pikiell played him a lot when that wasn't necessarily the expectation coming into the season. He played him at times over some more experienced guys. It's been a tough year offensively for him. He's still an important part of their rotation, but it hasn't quite panned out, I think, the way they thought it might.
Yeah. And finally, we'll go to Who Cleans a Glass Best, brought to you by the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. Who will clean your glass best in your house or your business, high rise, apartments, state capital, whatever it might be? They can come out and take care of them. I don't know that they're cleaning windows right now in this temperature. I think it'd probably be difficult.
Yeah,
You
you
go
would
up with the
think.
bucket. By the time you get up there, it's a block of ice. I'm not quite
Th-
sure, but
Thursday they'll be able to get
Thursday,
back out.
right? Thursday gets when it gets up into the balmy 20s, they can be back
Yeah.
on the ladders again. So you don't have to. They can take care of the outside, the exterior
Hmm.
part of the house. They'll power wash it, which again, I can't imagine doing that on a ladder right now. But this if no weights, you can get right first in line. You can take care of your house and clean it up. They can also do the interior, obviously the interior windows, blinds, screens, windowsills, whatever needs to be done. The nicest people, great pricing. You get 15% off as a listener of the show. You just go to support page at thefinalfour.com/support. Mention Final Four when you get the estimate from Troy and his team. And they are in Grand Rapids, but they're in a much larger area too around the Grand Rapids area. So call them. I mean, they've gone all the way to the capital, so clearly they'll do any job and they'll do it well. They also doing interior painting in the winter. So if you need a couple of rooms freshen up, the Swedish Squad of Grand Rapids is who you should call first. It'd be a mistake not to. So this really lousy system we have now, where you've won four in a row now. It was six. I was up 6-4, and I had I thought maybe this was going to work, and now the snake draft has really gone south on me. So you get to pick first this time, and to pick which player Michigan State, which I guess duo cleans the glass best. So I'm going to guess you're going to start with Kohler, but I'll let you tell me who you want.
Well, it's not quite as easy here because um, the matchups are
Mm-hmm.
going to be really interesting. We had this discussion for a little bit on the Spartan Mag board this afternoon.
Right, because we got Bailey, who's going to be the difficult one, right? 6'10".
Right. Because I can imagine Jackson guarding Dylan Grant. Dylan Grant's 6'7", and he does have a perimeter game, and he's a decent athlete, but Jackson can hang with him, in my opinion.
Sure.
I don't know that I believe Jackson can hang with Ace Bailey. But if you start with what has become the normal MSU starting lineup, if you start Jackson on Dylan Grant, that means Jaden Akins is guarding Ace Bailey. And I really don't like that matchup.
No, 6'4" and 6'10".
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Ace Bailey is mobile enough and long enough that I don't think you can even realistically look at it as, well, but he's also got to guard our guy and he'll have I don't think it's that either.
Yeah.
So I wonder about the matchups. I'm still going to go Jackson just because that's the safest pick game to game to game. Even the last game, he wasn't the leading rebounder, right? But he was up there. I think he still had 6. So I'm
Yeah.
going to go with Jax because we know he's going to play some, and every minute he's out there, he's a good choice to grab a rebound. So I'm going to go with Jax, but I don't think it's as easy as it typically is.
Well, I'm going to stick with Cooper because he's been rebounding really
Yeah.
well the last few games. I think
Yep.
he'll get some time in this game. They've got some big players and a lot of size, and he's a guy who's mobile enough that he's going to get enough minutes. For that reason, I'm not going to go with Sapala. I'm just going to go with Fiddler, I think, just because I think he's going to get some time here too this game. He's shown he's done pretty well rebounding. And before you pick, I just want to mention too, Nick Sanders is out with Liz Frank. He's got the Liz Frank fracture, so he's gone. So I don't know if that affects your pick here.
Is he gone for the season?
I think so. He's in a boot. Yeah, I can't imagine he comes back at
Oh
this
wow! I
point.
didn't realize.
Yeah.
Wow, that's
So he's
too
probably done
bad.
for the year, I would guess.
Yeah, it's interesting you say Frankie because he was. If you had picked Zapala, I was leaning toward him for my choice. It's a really interesting choice here now for me
Yeah.
between Zapala and Cohen Carr.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Yeah, because
those
you
are
can
the
figure
two
Carr's going to get some
guys.
time out there too.
I
Yeah.
think Carr's got to because again, you think about what are the best matchups for Ace Bailey. Well, he would be one of those guys. Not
Mhm.
ideal, but gives you a fighting chance. I
I don't
think
think
I
Carr has
think
got
I'm
more than
gonna
4
go.
this year, right?
No, he's had a game. He's had at least one game where he did better than that.
Okay.
I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go with Cohen. I usually am very willing to pick Zapala, and it
Yeah.
won't shock me if he has a decent game on the glass because there is a lot of size out there. I think he will play, but I'm gonna go with Cohen.
Yeah. Well, Shimon has not given me the impression that he's going to be a guy who's going to get pulled down 8 or something in at this point. At least he hasn't for quite a while. So,
He
um,
hasn't for a while, but I think, we're getting into this stretch of Big Ten play, and this is one game that fits that mold where there are a lot of traditionally sized
yeah, that's
fives,
true. Yeah.
and he's going to be needed. And when you're 7 feet and he's a capable rebounder. I'm gonna be surprised if we don't see like a game or two where he's at 8 or 9.
Yeah.
I think it'll happen. It's just a matter of, do you get it on the right day for our
Yeah.
purposes?
Well,
Well,
you also
I'll
wonder,
go with Cohen.
right? You wonder with Bailey too, if because it's a difficult, the size 6'10", the difficult matchup. You wonder if someone might get into some foul trouble too, trying to stop him, and especially so yeah, that could
Possibly.
affect things too. But there's no way to predict that as far as who it's going to be.
No.
So finally, that brings us to the 5 keys to the game, brought to you by Nudge Printing. If you need Spartan apparel, there's no better place to go than Nudge Printing. You can find them at nudgeprinting.com. As a listener to the show, you get 20% off. You go to and type in Final Four at the coupon page at the code at the very end, just as one word. Type that in. You get the great discount for some really great apparel. Whether you're looking for a fathead, kind of big giant stickers, you're looking for little stickers for your computers. That's sort of where he first started his printing. He then moved on to apparel, and Gabe and Brittany have licenses for all the Michigan State. They're only official licensed, I think, provider besides like the big ones like Nike and Adidas and things like that. So you want to head on over to Nudge Printing. You get the vintage gear. You can get the stuff that's the new logos. Anything you want as far as hoodies, sweatshirts, coats, hats. Gabe made some really cool custom baseball caps, though I don't know who wears a baseball cap when it's 400 below zero right now. But you'd be ready for spring. So make
I
sure
will I will be in about 10 days.
10 days. Where could you possibly be in 10 days? You'd be wearing a baseball cap. Certainly
Yeah.
not in Michigan, right? Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, we'll see what it's like you're taking me, so we're going to go to LA, and I've been to Vegas when it snows. So I'm just going to put that warning out there. I know I mentioned it before.
It's all going to be great.
It's going to be hopefully it's not too smoky at that point. It should be done by then.
I think we're all
So
right.
anyway, head on over to Nudge Printing. You won't regret it. Great stuff over there. As I mentioned, 20% off. Even if you're not looking for Michigan State stuff, maybe you've got someone else in your family went to a different school in the state of Michigan. They got all kinds of other gear there, as well as Iowa and Indiana. All right, so keys to the game. The big first key of the game is the Madison Square Gardens, MSG. It's not a place Michigan State's played well. I mean, I tried. I don't. I know they lost to Rutgers last time they played there,
Yep.
about 3 years ago, 2 years ago.
It
Maybe
was in the 2023 season, I
so
believe.
2 years ago. Yeah. So
Yeah.
that was a year which certainly looked like Michigan State had a chance.
That was
Anyway,
a game they should have won.
Yeah, they should have won. Well, that's a mini list that games they should have won the last few years that just kind of
Yeah.
slipped away from them. It was a place that Rutgers fans were very upset that they lost the game because at that point the RAC was a massive home court advantage where
Yeah.
you could, and I mean obviously you'd rather have the game there than have to drive all the way to New York and to go see them play. Of course, they won that game, and so then they've been much more excited about going to Madison Square Garden since then. It's really Rutgers alum that might be around the New York area. So anyway, it's going to be Madison Square Gardens. Michigan State not doing well whenever they play the Champions Classic. They're 0-4 at Madison Square Gardens. They're 1-2 in NCAA tournament games. So in general, not a good record in that building for inexplicable reasons. Now, of course, it's just random in many respects because most of those were neutral court games. So you can't expect most of those players are not on this team outside of the last time they played Rutgers. You got a couple players. So anyway, so it's like a mini curse that's probably not really much of a curse.
They actually played there twice 2 years ago. They lost to Rutgers in the regular season, and then that was the site of the Kansas State loss in the tournament.
Oh, right, yeah.
So if you remember, there was the big deal with their point guard and Tyson Walker
Right, the
coming
pizza
home to
buying
New York.
Izzo pizza
Yeah,
and stuff. Yeah,
right. So, yeah, there's been the only win that I could find was many years ago I believe it was the 14. No, it was the 13-14 season. In the Sweet 16, they beat a very good one-seeded Virginia team there in an all-time MSU Classic. I remember Brandon Dawson having a huge impact, and it was a great win. And then they faced a UConn team that had really not had a great regular season, but just caught fire, ended up winning the national title inexplicably, and they beat Michigan State in an Elite Eight game there, which I think most people expected them to win. That was a game where Keith Appling was kind of hampered with an injury,
Yeah.
and it really hurt Michigan State. It was competitive, but they just couldn't get over the hump. So some unfortunate tournament luck in that building. Ofer in Champions Classic. They're going to be back there next year, by the way. So no time like the present to put all those bad memories in the rearview mirror and win one.
Yeah, for sure. This is
I
definitely a
don't
game
think
that's winnable. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I don't think look, I don't think there's really anything to this other than as I say, there are some guys on this team who have been in that building and lost. And so is there a tiny psychological element? Maybe. I kind of doubt it's that big of a deal. It's probably not even anything they're talking about.
No, I doubt it.
But the other thing that comes with it, though, is as opposed to a typical conference game, even a top conference road game, there is something to it. You know, when you're playing, and look, I say this as somebody that was born in that city. I don't have any time for pro New York bullshit. I think it's a joke. I think it's over. And not the city's a joke, but all that, mecca of basketball. My mecca of basketball was Jennison Fieldhouse and Cobo Hall. All right. Not that. But it is viewed that way by a lot of people. And it does come with some atmosphere. The good news is it allows for many more Michigan State people to be in that building than the RAC does. And I think you will see that. I think you'll see a decent MSU turnout for that game. So that's a positive. But yeah, it's just, you just want to see it, like we say all the time with these kind of stupid things, you just want to have it off the table so it's no longer a talking point.
Right.
And
Finally
then you go on
Duke,
about
right?
your
Yeah,
business.
right.
Yeah. Just move past it.
Did they ever play with some of the Big Ten tournaments in New York in Madison Square Gardens?
In Brooklyn, they played at the Barclays.
Okay, I
Barclays
couldn't remember because they had to play a different week because it was the Big East tournament was before. Okay.
Yeah, and they couldn't get Madison Square Gardens, so they played at Barclays. I'm pretty sure that's right.
All right, so the second key of the game is probably one of the most obvious, the stars, both top 5 lottery picks. You've got Bailey and you've got Harper. And as we've mentioned a number of times, I think Bailey presents a greater disadvantage, or at least a challenge for Michigan State's defense because he is 6'10", and he's, obviously 6'10", could shoot and can drive, and it's hard cover for anybody. And that's one of the things we worry about with Jack Kohler going into the season. Could he play the 4? Could he play against these players? And this would be a really tough matchup, obviously.
Well, that's not to say that Harper doesn't create some physical issues as well at 6'5". Sure. Jaden's in pretty good shape to handle him. I think that Trey and Jace can probably hang in there, but all those guys are giving up a little bit of size. Ideally, you'd be in a position where you could think about, well, maybe we play a little more Frankie and or Cohen to deal with him because they are exact physical matches for him, at least in terms of height and weight. But Bailey also being in there, and these guys play heavy minutes too, so you don't get much of a break. It does pose a challenge for Michigan State's roster. Look, realistically, you're not going to shut both of these guys down. If you limited one of them, that would be great. But I'm not even counting on that. So I think the realistic goal is you make it tough on them. You make it an inefficient day. So Bailey goes out and gets his 20, but he has to take, 18 shots to get it.
Sure.
And you don't bail him out by putting him on the line a ton. It's that kind of thing. You limit how much Harper is able to do as a playmaker, for others. It's those kinds of things. So I don't think this is one where you say, oh, we got to take these, which Michigan State has done a very good job of this year, taking away the other team's A-list guy, the number one option, or limiting that player. MSU has done a very good job of that this season. I don't see that as the equation here. I think that the way you get at Rutgers is the way most people have, which is the two freshmen kind of get their numbers, but you limit anybody else from really going
Sure.
off. It's
Yeah.
it's sort of similar to the Northwestern situation, right? Where we
Yeah.
knew going in, hey, Martinelli and Barnheiser are gonna get theirs. You're not gonna totally shut those guys down. And they're gonna run their offense through those guys. They're gonna get a bunch of shots. It's just how it is. But if you look at how Michigan State played that game, yeah, Martinelli went off and had a great day, but Barnheiser was a little bit inefficient. They kept him in check, and nobody else went off.
Yeah. Well,
So
we know the coaching staff listens to our show and they go game plan off our
yeah,
players keeping the
yeah,
gutter, which is why they shut down
right,
Barnheiser and said, that's we're going to shut down. So,
right,
all right, third key to the game is boards, which is
yeah.
unusual, right? This is as I mentioned before, this is
Well,
an issue you expect Rutgers to be really elite or pretty close to, and they've been very bad. Michigan State has had trouble recently keeping people off the offensive boards. Even not Illinois, who's very good. So that's, you can say it's not a real loss to let Illinois do well, but they certainly were much better the second half than the first half, for instance.
I think that's the thing. We'd be talking about rebounding any year against Steve Pikiell team, but what's different
Right.
this time is it's not just, hey, you're going to have to really fight to stay even. It's you ought to have a distinct advantage here, and you need to exploit that.
Yeah.
As you say, lately, like the last 4 games or so, Michigan State's had a really tough time on the defensive glass. Offensive rebounding has remained strong, pretty much throughout. Defensive rebounding has taken a step back. However, that second half performance against Illinois gives me some hope that maybe they're ready to arrest that decline. They need to, because I think this needs to be a game you want to have, like, in a 7-8% advantage in offensive rebounding rates.
Sure.
You should, by all accounts, looking at the math, at the season track record, you should have that kind of advantage minimum, and maybe more. And so we'll hope for that.
And this is not a make right game. It's particular because, of course, it's on the road. Although it's not really a road game, it's a road game. It's neutral court. I'm sure
Semi-road game.
I'm sure
is
when you
how
look at Ken
Palm
Palm, or it's
classifies
gonna be classified as a neutral court, right?
Well, they classify it as semi-home.
Semi-home.
Yeah.
Semi-home.
And
So
I don't know
like you're in
what
the yard, but you're not actually in the house itself.
right, right. I don't know what the differentiation between semi-home and neutral is for him, like how many miles away from campus. If but there is. I think there's some kind of, because I know that's been controversial at times. Like I have to go back to double check it, but I almost want to say that the Baylor game last year was classified as a neutral site game for Michigan State, played at Little Caesars.
Even though it felt like a home game for probably Michigan
State. Right. So there's something he does, I believe, with distance. But again, whatever. We all know the score.
Yeah. All I know is most accidents happen within 10 miles of home, right?
Right.
All right. So the fourth key to the game is playing downhill. Obviously, Michigan State is really good at playing downhill in general. They did that against Illinois because outside shooting is not where they make their money and getting the foul line. And this is a team that, as for Rutgers defensively, that has trouble keeping people out of the lane.
They really do. They struggled with it a lot, I thought, against Penn State. And there's no reason that Michigan State should not be able to exploit it. It would be surprising to me if they're not. Look, it's bottom line is, I think it's the number one thing that won them that game against Illinois, because you could correlate Jacashonas's foul trouble to that. You could correlate Michigan State's offensive production, despite the fact that they were only 3 for 10 from 3, to that. Not only the way they shot from the floor, but the way they got to the line and even though it was a little below their normal production, 21 points at the free throw line is still a big deal. So we know that's part of this team's calculus for winning games. And I think Rutgers has been just not a very sound defensive team at any point this year, it would be surprising to see them suddenly turn into one for this game.
Yeah. Which kind of blends into the fifth key to the game, tempo. This is an opportunity for Michigan State. If you can clear the defensive glass, then you get your transition game. And I mean, it's mostly freshmen outside of Acuff in the starting lineup. So you think, they're going to be a little undisciplined in transition defense. It's opportunities to make some hay there.
I think that the whole deal with Rutgers this year is that they're undisciplined. And I don't mean that, they're wild guys who can't be coached. I don't mean that in that sense. What I mean is they haven't been around long enough to really absorb and make second nature the way that Steve Pikiell wants to play. Add to what you just said, the fact that Rutgers also plays fast. They're in the top 100 in overall pace and length of offensive possession. That's unheard of. I mean, Steve Pikiell teams have been slogging kind of, and brontosaurus paced teams. And
velociraptors now, huh? So we're gonna use some dinosaurs.
Well, it's closer to that for sure. But that probably will help with Michigan State getting this game played the way they want it to be. They want to be able to go up and down. If you watched the Penn State game last night, and this is just the most recent example, we know Penn State loves to play fast too, and they did regularly in that game. Michigan State's a better transition team than Penn State. They get more out of fast-paced basketball than anybody in this league. So you put all this together, the fact that you've got reason to believe that Rutgers probably won't be very effective on the offensive glass. So that means Michigan State hopefully is getting consistent and clean defensive rebounds. Rutgers is going to try to play fast in general. Those things should lead to Michigan State having transition opportunities. And, if they get enough of those, that could be the equivalent to them dropping the hammer on this game. I mean, if they're able, with everything else, if Michigan State is able to get, say, 25 fast break points, which I don't think is beyond reason to think that they could get, I have a hard time seeing Rutgers pushing them, never mind winning.
Yeah, I was just seeing earlier, I think the Michigan State is the top scoring team in the conference, as from an offense standpoint, over 80 points a game.
Would make sense. Yeah,
and
would make sense.
I think this is the highest scoring Spartan team since like in the 80s with Scott Skiles.
It's the 85-86 team, which is the best offensive team I've ever seen at Michigan State. Unbelievable. Team
that was without a three-pointer back then too.
No three-pointers, and Scott Skiles, a 6'1" unathletic guard, shot like 56% from the floor. And trust me, those were not all layups. Those were jump shots. A lot of those would have been threes in the modern game. But that was a team that started three guards, although one of the guards was 6'6". And then the big man spots, such as they were Larry Pollock, who was a 6'8", really a small forward, a finesse player, and Barry Fordham, who was a 6'8" center, who really wasn't much of a scorer other than the last game they played against Kansas. But that team, without that much size, was just incredible shooting the ball. They were an incredible transition team, so they scored a lot of easy points that way, but that no post-up threats, like none. But they just played so fast and passed the ball so well as a team, and they shot it so well, meaning from range as well as around the basket, that they've set the standard. I've never seen an offensive team at Michigan State, and I'm including like the Magic teams, which were great, but they weren't as good offensively as that Scott Skiles team was.
I thought you had to have a post-up presence in order to be able to score from outside at all. Is that not true? That's what...
No. There are lots of ways to skin a cat, and that team was so far ahead of their time. If you had that team with a 3-point shot, I can't even imagine what kind of damage they would have done, because they had shooters. Like all four guys except for Barry Fordham could really shoot, and that was not a regular thing in those days, where four guys were legitimate jump shot threats. I mean, take it back to the 79 national championship team. Of the 6 guys that played in the rotation, they really only played 6. Only 2 of them could really hit jumpers. I mean, Terry Donnelly and Mike Berkovich. Magic wasn't a great jump shooter.
No.
Jay Vincent could hit like 12-foot turnaround jumpers. Elser wasn't a guy who took a lot of those shots, and Ron Charles was a dunker. So that was more standard in those days. The 85-86 team, though, totally different animal. They played a brand of basketball that would be very recognizable to modern audiences. And I've never seen anything like it offensively at this school. But this team, I'm not putting them in that class yet. I still think, and this would be an interesting debate, we've got time to unfold with this group and this season. And despite the numbers, I have a hard time putting this team at the top of Tom Izzo offensive groups, if for no other reason than we know the 3-point shooting, although it's gotten much better in conference play, it's still not great.
It's not that good, no.
I think the best I've seen, I would lean toward the 2015-2016 team with Denzel Valentine, Bryn Forbes.
Yeah.
Those guys played that brand of basketball that was just so much fun to watch. I think they led the nation from 3, but the way they passed it, they did have some interior threat with Matt Costello and Deontay Davis. That was a fun team to watch. But this one is really good. It's underrated offensively. I would agree with that. I don't think people have fully grasped, because people just get hung up, like casuals just get hung up on the jump shooting stuff. And they think whether you hit a lot of jump shots or not directly correlates to how effective an offensive team you are. And that it just isn't so.
Well, and I'd also add not only just the jump shooting, the 3-point shooting, which is absolutely something people bring up all the time, but the fact that Michigan State does not have a mega scorer on the team.
That too.
Right. I mean, there's only one person averaging double figures. You'd easily look at that and see a team that doesn't shoot the 3 very well and doesn't have anyone who's shooting
You're right.
Average 15 points a game, not even. And you look at that, just like, there's no way this team is a good offensive team, and yet they average more than anyone else because everybody else is like 8 to or 7 to 9 points.
I think the other thing that happens is,
and every being 10.
people have a hard time internalizing, and this would be understandable for Michigan State fans because we haven't seen a team that plays this way.
Right.
But it's difficult to keep in mind, to conceptualize what impact on offensive efficiency and just point scoring, being effective at the free throw line. And I don't just mean the percentage you hit, but also the frequency with which you get there. That's the part that we don't typically see at MSU. So if you get hung up on just thinking about shooting from the floor, it's not giving you the total picture. Yeah. It really isn't. So yeah, I'm with you. I think it's become a good offensive team. We'll see where they get to by the time it's all over.
Yeah, and I think we both think there's more 3-point shooting in there somewhere.
100%,
right? But
100%.
Haven't seen a ton of that really at this point.
Look at the Big Ten, the numbers in conference games though, and ironically, the guy who's been the best over the course of the season, Jace Richardson, is not shooting that well in conference games, but other guys. Jaden Akins, much better.
Yeah, 42%. Yeah,
there's a few guys like that. Even Frankie Fiddler, whose overall numbers are abysmal, that's starting to tick up a little bit.
Because he hasn't shot much. He's just he's been many minutes. Yeah, right.
And he's been hitting a few.
Yeah, right.
So
you only need to hit a few, and
you're seeing some of those guys making improvement as the season's going along. So yeah, we're both in agreement there. There is more potentially to unlock with Michigan State 3-point shooting.
Yeah. And they average 7 more free throws made per game than they did last year, which is, a massive. I mean, 7 points is a huge amount.
Big difference.
Which, interestingly, is what Torvik has as the margin of difference between Rutgers and Michigan State for this game. They have Michigan State as a 7-point favorite at this point.
I think that's a fair number because
for a semi-away game, right?
Well, the thing is that, you're not at home. You never know how a few days off will affect you. That's another thing. Like Rutgers has almost as many. They played 1 day sooner, so they're both facing it. Mm-hmm. But I think the big thing is, we talked about this at the start of the season, right? We've already seen it come to pass. Like these two two or three teams at the bottom, you're not totally safe any night you're playing those
No.
teams because they've all got somebody. We saw it with
Or
Dawson
some buddies.
Garcia, right? Multiple, right? But we saw it with Minnesota taking out Michigan. Dawson Garcia goes off, has a great game, hits the game winner. They've, Washington with Osobor, good enough that on a given night you could see him scoring, 28 and leading them to an upset win. And they've already done that. They did that to Maryland.
Yep.
So Rutgers has two of those guys. And that's why you can't feel, oh, this is a laugher. I don't expect it to be a laugher. I'm just saying this is a game Michigan State should win. Like all the elements are there that you look at it, as opposed to the last one against Illinois, we said, look, they're going to have to do a lot of things well to win this game. And they did. They didn't play an A game by any means, but they did enough. This is one where you'd say, hey, Michigan State's got to do some things poorly. And Rutgers has to have those two freshmen be pretty much at least what they've been through the course of the season, and then probably get somebody else to join the fun. And that's all possible, but you take Michigan State. I think 7 points, 7-point favorite on the road is pretty significant. Yeah. It suggested on a neutral court, you're probably a double-digit favorite. So that's pretty substantial, but I think it's fair.
Yeah, well, Michigan State has the opportunity to go 8-0 there, and then coming home against Minnesota, you assume they pull that out and head out west 9-0, which, I think your most optimistic projections before the season started, I don't think you'd have had them as 9-0. At least I don't think.
I picked them fifth. So there's no way I had them 9-0.
Yeah, your fifth pick is not looking good now, which is great.
And I'll take it, right. but that's the thing. I do think you point something out. I think it's important to bank these because now we're 7 games in. So we're, a little over a third of the way through the conference schedule. So I do think we're seeing some I do this post every Sunday night where I put on the Spartan Mag board where I put the conference into 4 tiers, and it shifts over the, from week to week, obviously.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think at this point, that first tier, which I've got Michigan State, Illinois, Purdue, and Michigan in, I do think has started to separate itself. Because when you look at the second tier, the one team in the second tier that I could, if I squint hard enough, I could imagine maybe getting into the discussion would be Wisconsin.
Yeah.
But I don't expect it. And beyond them, Oregon could rack up some wins, but they got 3 home losses already. They haven't started to see the impact of the travel they've got to face. So I don't like their odds. And then you get beyond that and you don't feel great about the chance, at least I don't, about the chances of any of those other teams finding their way into that title discussion. So to bring it back around to Michigan State, you're in. I think you've done enough, and all 4 teams of that group have done enough to separate themselves a bit from the rest of the pack. Like, if somebody offered me odds on, well, you take one of these 4 teams to win the league or the rest of the field, I'd take one of those 4 teams. It wouldn't even be a close call. I think it's going to be one of those 4. But we know that starting on February 1st, that's when it starts to turn up for Michigan State.
Right.
Because you've got road games that are tougher. They've had they had a road game at Minnesota. They had a road game at Ohio State. They had a road game at Northwestern. Who else am I missing? They've got this one. Is that it?
That's it. Yeah.
I think that's it. So this will be the 4th one. The way the league has shaken out, that's kind of the end, because the next weakest team that you're playing on the road would probably be Iowa.
Yeah.
And Iowa at home, and the way they shoot the ball,
right.
You wouldn't go into that saying, oh, that's a mortal lock. I'm going to be a little nervous about that one. And that's the weakest. You've got, the 2, well, give or take USC. And you've got those 2 LA games. You got road game at
Maryland.
Illinois. You got a road game at Maryland. You got a road game at Michigan.
Yeah.
Those are they're all winnable games. Illinois maybe less so than the others, but they're winnable games, but they're going to be challenging. You're going up in class in terms of the caliber of road opponent compared to what we've seen thus far. And then you look at the home games, and again, those are at Breslin. You think you should beat anybody, right? But you got Michigan coming in, you got Purdue, you got Wisconsin, Indiana. Well, yeah, Indiana. But the other 3,
it's not Minnesota.
It's not Minnesota, but at Breslin, come on. But you see what I mean? Like those aren't gimmies either. So I will say this. I actually, on balance, for as much as people have obsessed about how much tougher it gets in February, I'm okay with the schedule. And the reason I'm okay is that I look at 2 places that could have been road games that aren't, Purdue and Wisconsin.
Right.
And that's meaningful. That's meaningful to me, that those are at Breslin. If we were playing at Mackey, put it down as an L. I mean, the odds are very tough. It's stacked against you, and if you had that to add to at Illinois, at Michigan, it's, that starts to get dicier. But I feel as if, other than Illinois, the other road games, as tough as, they got Oregon at home too. We can't forget that.
That's right.
Coming up. But again, it's at Breslin. It's at Breslin.
Yeah.
So I do like it. You're going to face good teams, right, in the schedule. You don't get to. It's like Tom Izzo was asked about how he felt about going to Illinois if he didn't like it. He said, "Of course I don't like it." But he said, "But I do like it in the sense that we're going to play a good team and grow from it and all that."
Yeah.
But that's you're going to play good teams. But I think, on balance, the schedule is not as nasty as maybe some people think it is, because they got to drill down a little bit more and think about who you're playing where. Yeah. And it's not so bad. But anyway, to bring it back around, you really want to get these next 2, because if you get them, they're games that you look at and you say, we're going to be substantial favorites. We ought to win them. That puts you at 9-0 going to California. And then you got 11 left. And from there, okay, then we'll see. The caliber of opponent gets turned up a bit, in some cases quite a bit. You're playing tougher road games. You're maybe having some tougher teams coming into your building. But I feel pretty good. If Michigan State can avoid losing these 2, they're 9-0. And then I think you really start feeling like, all right, now it's time to kick in the rest of the way. And you also know that you're going to have a little bit of wiggle room. I don't expect Michigan State to go 20-0.
Really?
Yeah, I know, it's a shocker, but I can see it. I could see the path to winning this thing,
Yeah.
And the thing that's been great about this team, and I say this having just witnessed a team I would have said exactly the same thing about losing on Saturday night in another sport. This team, though, thus far, I don't think has given us as fans, observers, any reason to believe that they're just going to go out and just lay a bunch of eggs.
Yeah.
Where, they just don't show up, a half-assed effort. There's no focus, but I don't believe that with this team. They're not going to win them all, but they might even lose 1 or 2 that we don't see coming. That's possible. You can have that happen, but I just don't think this team is going to go out there and do the kind of things that lead to you losing a bunch of games in a row. I just don't think that. I think they've got a competitiveness and a mental and physical toughness. It's funny. I was listening to a podcast today, a Michigan podcast, and they were talking about how the last week where they lost to Minnesota and they got taken in overtime by Northwestern, maybe started to show that there's a chink in the armor there, that they don't react well to physical play, which is something I've been saying all along with that team. If you're going to beat them, the way to do it is you get into them. You get into Danny Wolf when he's trying to play point guard. You get up into him, you make him feel you. And that's the way you beat them. And I think it's true. I think Michigan, we'll see if they can adjust to it. But thus far, I think there are indications they got trouble coming because the rest of their schedule is tough. And they're going to start seeing these more physical teams. They played a lot of the Pac-12 schools thus far who are also having their problems with that. That's not a problem for Michigan State. They just proved it. If you had any doubts, they just went and proved it in that game against Illinois because Illinois came at them hard and played physically, and it didn't matter.
Yeah.
So anyway,
we'll leave it there. We'll
state of the Big Ten world. In 10 minutes.
We'll be back obviously after Rutgers game in Saturday, but we'll probably have a little extra content for you before then. We'll just see how that goes, but I'll leave you in suspense. There you go. Make sure if you're watching this YouTube, head on over. You can, for one thing, go over to YouTube and you can subscribe to the show. You can get it at TFFINOTS. If you're there, make sure you hit the subscribe button. We really appreciate it. We're trying to get our subscribers over 500, which for our brand new YouTube page would be pretty cool. So we see can get that a little bit more by the end of the season. We're actually moving pretty well. So hopefully we get there. So until next time, the Final Four is on the schedule. Go Green.